Hey, welcome back to the show. As you can see on the screen with me right now, if you're listening on the radio, by the way, this is on YouTube and it is being videoed, but on the screen with me right now is Matt Feshbach. He is the CEO of Ambrose Cell Therapy. Today is a show about stem cell treatment. I just wanted to introduce him because I'm going to talk a little bit so you know who this guy is sitting there looking at me as I talk here for a second. As you know, we do broadcast on the radio out of WSMN 1590 out of southern New Hampshire, northern Boston, and we're also out on the net as a podcast. So today we're going to talk about stem cell treatment. Now, the reason I have Matt on, Matt is the CEO of a stem cell treatment center, but I just have to give you a little background. Matt and I really started interacting. I knew about Matt just from friends years ago, but he and I started interacting more when some years ago, you've heard this probably on my show, a friend of mine had kidney failure. And she was searching around trying to figure out what to do. And she was older than I was at the time. I think she was probably 65, maybe. Something like that. No, probably not that old, 60, something like that. So this is now 10 years ago. And she called me up one day and said, hey, I'm not going to get a transplant. They were at the point of giving her, wanting to do a kidney transplant. She'd been on dialysis. She'd been healthy otherwise her whole life. And she said, I'm not going down that road. I just refuse. And I found a place literally from her hairdresser, referred her to a place in Ecuador to do stem cell treatment. Now, this was earlier on we'd all heard about the embryonic stem cell situation, and President Bush said, we're not going to do that, and herd embryos. There was a whole hubbub going on in the U.S. But at the time, I said, I'm going with you. I went with her because she was frail, she was older, and I needed a good adventure. So we went down to Ecuador, and she did this stem cell treatment. And I got to tell you, remarkable. She was off dialysis. She didn't even tell her doctors. She couldn't tell her doctors because if she had, they would have not been treating her any further because she was going out of the country for treatment with stem cells. She came back, and within, I think, about 3 or 4 months, 5 months or so, she gotten off of dialysis. And she had a port in her chest. If anybody knows about dialysis, she had this port. And I think within 6 months, they pulled the port out. And she didn't tell her doctors for some time. They could not figure out what was going on and why she was recovering. And eventually, she told them it was stem cell treatment. So this is when I got deeply impressed as my friend came back from this situation. And at the time, someone introduced me to Matt. Matt was at the time starting a clinic in the Bahamas. And he and I started interacting. And I even went to some conferences, stem cell conferences. I was very fascinated. There's a future of stem cell treatment. So I've seen this work firsthand. Just telling you where I'm coming from. I know quite a bit about it. I track it. And I wanted to have Matt on today so we can talk about it and bring you up to date, because this is really the future of healthcare, in my opinion. So Matt, there's my intro. You and I, you are now very familiar with that story.
Yeah, thank you. And I really appreciate your including me in on your show. And I would love to update your audience.
So let's first start. I think the best place to start is what we have to clear up stem cell, because even when I talk to people today about stem cell, back in the 10, 15 years ago, when there was the embryonic stem cell controversy that George Bush really put a kibosh on, it's such a different world today. And so let's talk about just strictly first, what are stem cells?
Yeah, so I can keep that pretty simple. So people often ask, well, do stem cells work? And the obvious answer is, of course they work, because we're all walking stem cell products. So a stem cell is a cell that everything else stems from, right? So they're a cell that is like a blank slate, and it decides it needs to be a heart cell or a muscle cell or a brain cell. And then it differentiates into that type of cell, and it infinitely replicates. It copies itself over and over and over and over. So the reason we know stem cells work is because the most basic stem cell interaction is between the sperm and the egg. And the sperm and the egg become the embryo. We don't have to get into the birds and the bees here, but they become the embryo. And in the embryo, there's only 90 stem cells. And those are those controversial cells that you were talking about. But what they do is their job is to develop our body. So they become those nerve cells and brain cells and cartilage cells and heart cells. And 9 months after conception, we have a fully developed body. At that point, there is no embryonic stem cell function. But what you have are what's called adult stem cells. So adult stem cells is really a misnomer because a newborn infant has adult stem cells. So what they really should be called is repair cells.
Okay.
And the reason they're called repair cells is because their job is to fix our bodies if we get sick or have an injury or that kind of thing. And there's a leading stem cell researcher now at Texas Heart Institute. She gave a talk at Harvard about 3 or 4 years ago, and she said, these cells, they're very abundant when we're born in our bloodstream, in our bone marrow, our skin, etc. You can see that in the health of our tissues. And it's possible that we could have had a heart attack when we were 5, and those cells just got mobilized and fixed them. And I can explain how they fix it, how they would fix that heart attack. But the trouble with these so-called adult stem cells is that in most tissues of your body, they deplete precipitously with age, and that they also lose their potency. So we can see that in our dermis or skin because we lose some fat, we lose some blood flow, we look a little older. Same thing. You can also see that, if you break a bone when you're 5, you usually get a full repair. It recovers great, no problem. You break a hip when you're 70 or 80, you have a very high chance of dying because the stem cells in the bone marrow aren't able to mobilize and fix that hip. So when we're born, 1 in every 10,000 cells in your bone marrow is a stem cell. By the time you're 80, it's 1 in 2 million. So I always say, use your bone marrow stem cells when you're young.
So that's a good explanation. By the way, I just want to remind anybody listening right now on the release date of this is the 4th of July. So anybody listening, and if you're on camera, the reason I'm wearing this t-shirt is because it's 4th of July. This is my 4th of July t-shirt, and I bought it in Philadelphia. So that's the real place to buy 4th of July stuff, And I got these when I went around the country in 2016. I have a whole bunch of these shirts. This was kind of my uniform when I went. If you don't know about my trip in 2016, go to resetargov.org, and there's a whole website about it. And also a reminder, you can always email me if you want to get a message to Matt through me. We'll give out his website here in just a little bit, but you can always email at heyshaun@schaumburg.net. So, okay, so stem cells. Everyone is familiar with the fact that you have repair. You have a cut in your arm, cut on your finger. Stem cells go to work. Isn't that right? Isn't that what's repairing that cut?
It's the most basic. That's the most basic use case, I guess. Is right. Most basic example. Sorry.
So we have tons of stem cells in us already. They're doing things all the time. And a lot of times you hear about bone marrow transplants. That has to do, again, with stem cells going in and fixing blood problems. Is that you tell me, Matt, is that right?
Yeah, that's correct. So there's two basic types of adult stem cells. One are blood forming cells called hematopoietic cells. And those are very abundant in your bone marrow. And the other are these repair regenerative cells called mesenchymal stem cells. And we don't need to get into a lot of biology, but when you do a bone marrow transplant, that's typically for blood disorders. So they wipe out your immune system, clean out the bad blood cells and immune cells, and then replace them with these hematopoietic cells.
And usually
in our case,
it comes from somebody, right? Someone donates that.
It can be your own, but typically it's donor. Yes.
Okay. In that case, I mean, because it seems like the most common things people have heard about is bone marrow transplant. Someone gives up good bone marrow, puts it into someone else's body that is having trouble, and then you now have these stem cells working to try and repair blood. I'm trying to give you guys, listeners, listen, there's stem cells all over your body. I'm trying to give you the most commonly understood ones before we get into this a little deeper.
Yeah. So we've had those embryonic cells, which we don't use because we don't want to grow a new brain. We just want to repair your brain or your heart. Then we have these blood forming stem cells for blood cancers like leukemia and other blood diseases. And that's what's interesting about that is that those became a standard of care before there was even a clinical trial. There are very few actual clinical trials using the bone marrow transplants. They just started to work, so they did it.
We did it. Yeah. Okay.
And then we use these other cells called mesenchymal stem cells and other regenerative cells that reside in your fat. They also reside in your bone marrow and other places. We just harvest it from your fat.
Good. So again, to the listeners, the point of this, and I'm talking about this because I've talked to many people about stem cells, just friends, and this is the kind of questions that come up. Stem cells are in your body. They're entirely safe. They will not necessarily grow a new horn on your forehead if you do it correctly. And in this case, because as far as I know, Matt, the last time I researched it, everybody is the most afraid of the embryonic stem cells, and they don't want to hurt embryos, all that. But from the last time I studied, I don't think embryonic stem cells has ever been actually used on someone. I think they were used in research purposes for a while. I don't know if that's still the case, but this whole media storm that happened about embryonic stem cells is really they don't even use them for treatment. Am I right with that?
Well, there are places that claim to use embryonic stem cells like in Russia or Mexico, but legitimately, no, there have been a very, very few clinical trials. But with them, because there's this idea, since they're the most basic stem cell, that and the most powerful, that they could fix a lot of things. But the problem with them is that because they differentiate into anything and everything, you don't know what they'll grow into. And so when they've used them in certain clinical trials, or even in clinical practices in these places like Mexico, they can grow into tumors. Whereas your own adult stem cells that are in every tissue of your body, they do not generate tumors and cancer.
Okay, cool. So, and where we're going, folks, is we're going to get to the point here in the conversation of how we harvest your own stem cells and put them back into your own body. We're going to get to that point. We are talking to Matt Feshbach. He is the CEO of Ambrose Cell Therapy, located in Tampa. Is that right, Matt? And you're now looking at a location potentially in Beverly Hills.
Correct.
Okay. So this is on WSMN 1590. Again, I'm repeating that. And I also want you to know, if you're hearing this, you can share this. This goes out as a podcast. You can find this podcast at Shaumbra.net. The video portion will be on YouTube and also my Facebook page. But also it'll be out on Spotify and iTunes as a podcast only. But if you want to share this, if this information is coming across and you're like, hey, I know this is becoming more and more prevalent. People are looking more and more at this. So if this information is helpful to you, you can share it. And at this point, I really want to make sure you also know there is no exchange happening between Matt and I. Matt is not paying me to have him on. I'm not paying him to be on. I have Matt on. I know him as an expert. I've worked with him and understood what he's looking at for years. So that's why I wanted to have him on. I trust him with this kind of knowledge. And I think at this point, Matt, we have to point out you are not a doctor. You are not scientist. I think let's give them a little bit of your background on how you came to be where you are today.
Yeah. And it is very correct that I'm not a doctor and I'm not even allowed to play one on TV. But I have a unconventional background for someone who got into healthcare. I barely graduated from high school. I didn't go to college, and no joke, my worst subject was biology. When I got out of high school, I had the choice between being a burger flipper at McDonald's or an ice cream scooper at Baskin Robbins, or teaching tennis. I grew up in what we now call Silicon Valley, Palo Alto area, and I had played some competitive tennis as a kid. So I started teaching tennis to some affluent people who had their own tennis courts in that area, and ended up teaching tennis to some really prominent investor types. Former senior partner of Goldman Sachs, Chuck Schwab of Charles Schwab. Anyway, the list was pretty illuminary. So, so one day I decided I was on the wrong side of the net, and I decided to learn the investment business. Started a very early hedge fund, very successful. We took 20,000 under management and turned it into $1 billion in 9 years, of which $600 million was profit. But that hedge fund business is tough business. It's hard to have a good, it's hard to have a good 10th year. So, in fact, most hedge funds don't even last 5 years. So anyway, I unwound that, but I kept investing, and through some ups and downs and twists and turns, I ended up investing in the company that had the best technology for separating these adult stem cells from your fat. And your medical, the medical term for fat is adipose tissue. So these were adipose-derived stem cells, but it turns out in the fat, there's a bunch of other really powerful cells. They may even be more powerful than the stem cells, or more beneficial than the stem cells. And so I got really into it, but the FDA was, for some reason, obstructive and still has been very, very slow. There's only one adult stem cell approval by the FDA, and it's for what you suggested earlier, for blood-borne diseases.
Okay.
So there's and then one for what's called graft versus host, which is an autoimmune reaction to a bone marrow transplant, or that kind of thing. So I decided I would start a stem cell clinic in the Bahamas because I was so impressed with the results that this company in San Diego had gotten with treating people for end-stage heart failure. So I went to the Bahamas. That's when we met. It took me 2 years to get all the approvals, build the facility, blah, blah, blah. And while we were there, though, we treated over 300 patients. And I can't say we took anybody off dialysis, but we took a bunch of people off of the heart transplant list, the liver transplant list. It was really, really remarkable. It was a tough, tough business because we were in a developing country. It didn't have FDA approval, but the therapeutic benefits I saw for people with a wide range of chronic diseases really motivated me. It's one of those things. It hasn't been very remunerative, but it's really a missionary, not a mercenary activity for me. I'm very, very proud of what we've done for people. And your friend, of course, is our mutual friend. So, the fact that she had that kind of remarkable outcome was just outstanding.
Yeah, so you do have an unusual background, but I also have witnessed you stand in front of a group that include doctors and talk the lingo and talk the talk. So you've taken a deep dive and really done your due diligence and learned this industry and this and all the technology surrounding at least what you're doing now, correct?
Oh yeah, I've read. Well, I read at least one medical research paper a day. I probably read 2,500. I'm very, very versed, and I also know what my limits are. Like I don't
Sure.
try to play doctor, I don't try to play scientist, but there often I'll be talking to doctors, and they don't really know that much about these adult stem cells, and they're some of them are even prone to sort of false claims and false advertising that exists in what we call the rogue stem cell clinic world, where people aren't doing it legitimately, they're not doing it legally, they're not doing it at a high standard of care. And a lot of times they're telling patients they're getting stem cells when they're not.
Yeah.
Or as my kids would say, what the hell?
Well, we've all seen the media bring up the stories of someone getting stem cells and this crazy thing happened. So those are the very few times this rogue world you're talking about. There is some incidents of not doing it correctly or doing it safely that there's been problem, and that's the reason I went with my friend to Ecuador, because I thought we're going to a third world country and you're going to get some stem cells. I have to say that the situation with us going down there, the clinic was quite amazing. It was very high, clean, high. I was going to say high class. I'm not sure that's the right word, but it was professional, and of course, it delivered a good result. So, but we've heard of the bad. So again, this has come a long way. Now, there's one thing I want to talk to you about, Matt, because I know when we were in the Bahamas talking about this at the time, and you could not do this kind of service in the U.S. The FDA had barred it. And I still find, I know that we're going to talk about what the Right to Try Act, I guess there's a new act that under President Trump that came through. But one of the things that's always frustrated me that you and I have actually had a conversation with, and I sat with an attorney that was working for you at the time, is in this case, you're taking fat from somebody, you're spinning it down, you're pulling out the stem cells, and you want to turn around and put it right back in. It's someone's own fluid that you want to put back in their body, but the FDA says you cannot. At least they said that at the time. It's just unbelievable to me that it's your own fluid that you can't put back in your body.
Right. So the FDA considers stem cells a drug because they're active. The argument is, wait, they're not a drug.
No.
They're my own biology. So you can
Yeah.
get into a whole,
Oh my gosh.
it's a whole philosophical thing. And, there's plenty of reason to believe that the FDA has this wrong on one hand, but on the other hand, it's because they've been restrictive, they've also spawned a whole universe of rogue stem cell clinics that kind of do things, cut corners and do things behind the scenes. And so they don't have the standard of care that you may have experienced even in Ecuador.
Right.
Certainly they didn't have the standard of care that we built in the Bahamas. You saw our facility.
It was amazing.
Yeah, it was amazing. We had great doctors trained in Europe, US, the whole thing. So we called that a center of excellence, right?
Yeah.
Because we had everything that you needed to do it really, really right. But so what's happened is the FDA hasn't changed their position. In fact, they're coming down on stem cell clinics. Every week they write a warning letter to somebody who's selling products that are not approved or treating people with these unapproved products. But about I would say 6 or 7 years ago, a movement started called the Right to Try movement. It's a little bit of a diversion here, but it's very important, and it's important for everybody to know about it, whether they're interested in cell therapy or they have other issues. So the Right to Try movement was started out of the Goldwater Institute, which is really a libertarian think tank based on Barry Goldwater's philosophies. Senator Goldwater. I'm old enough to remember him.
Not a lot of listeners, but yeah.
Anyway, but the point with the Goldwater Institute is they said, hey, let's use states' rights, like so that people can access drugs that are unapproved for when they have a terminal illness like cancer. So I think over 40 states have now adopted a right to try law for terminally ill patients. They can, but the trouble is, big pharma is not selling to a doctor to treat that patient because they're worried about the FDA.
Sure.
They don't want to lose. They don't want to mess up their FDA pathway. And the right to try is really interesting. This is just my one little philosophical point on it, in that you see there's the World Health Organization in 1948, whether you like them or you don't today, came out with a constitution. They said we all have the right to health and the right to life. And there was the Declaration of Human Rights that Eleanor Roosevelt advocated for with the UN, and it essentially says we have the right to health and the right to life. Our Constitution says we have the right to health and the right to life. We have the right to live. But the trouble is, if you don't have the right to access a safe drug, you don't have the right to either one.
Right. So if you're dying, you're dying and you don't have, you can't try these drugs. Yeah, it's a problem.
Yeah. So a very smart senator out of, or a very evolved senator out of Wisconsin, Ron Johnson, he said, let's have a federal right to try law. And as long as the drug's made it through a phase 1 safety trial, which isn't trivial, people should have the right to access it. It's not a complicated law. It's like 1 page or 2 pages. This isn't like 50 pages. And he said, but that right to try has to be for people with terminal illnesses or life-threatening diseases. So when I saw that, I thought, well, that's not so great because, you don't want to just go give somebody stem cells right before they die.
Yeah.
Probably wouldn't work, not going to help. But then as I dug into it, I learned that the FDA defines a life-threatening disease as one that isn't necessarily immediately life-threatening. And in fact, it could take a long time and you might not even die from that disease, but it could be a debilitating disease. Okay. So there's tens of millions of people with debilitating conditions. In fact, there's 100 million people in the United States with 2 or more chronic diseases. They cost our healthcare system more than $2 trillion a year. It's the elephant in the healthcare room. Wow. And it's typically seniors, definitely adults, but it's over 100 million people. So this law is perfect for these patients because many of them can't tolerate the standard of care. They can't have another surgery. They can't even do a surgery. They've got too many things wrong. They can't take a drug or take another drug, or they had so many adverse effects to these drugs. And they can't have a device implanted. Like somebody with high blood pressure has a much higher risk of getting a joint replacement than somebody who doesn't, or somebody who's obese, that kind of thing. So this law is perfect for this population. And, it's millions and millions of people. Like just as one example, there are 4 million people in the United States who have what they call failed back syndrome, which means they went into the hospital, they got their back surgery, and 2 years later, they're back in the soup. And there's, I think it's 10 million people with both cardiovascular disease and kidney disease. That's bad. And there's autoimmune diseases you can't even keep up with.
Yeah. So the ones with the back trouble would actually qualify for this? I mean, that's a debilitating.
Yeah.
Huh. So
absolutely.
So the breadth of who could use this in the U.S. Now, let's say there's me. I just want to go down and get some stem cells. This law is not designed for me.
No. And I'm not convinced that somebody, what we call the worried well is really going to get a lot of benefit from getting an IV infusion of their own stem cells or somebody else's. They might feel better. Who knows? But the way these cells work is they home, or they kind of they travel to an inflammatory signal. That's inflammation is right at the core of all chronic conditions, whether it's local or systemic. So if you're a happy, healthy person, you probably don't have much inflammation, so they are not going to do much of a job. Like that example you used, you cut yourself, the stem cells activate and travel to the injury. That's because of the inflammation from the cut.
Right. So that's what brings them out, gets them going, and it goes. So stem cells, not the fountain of youth.
Well, no, I don't. Well, here's the thing. I can't say they aren't. I just know how you could prove it.
Yeah.
I don't know how you could prove that for the healthy. But what we do know is that they do. So there's something in medicine called the mechanism of action, how things work. So if you think about a chronic condition, something incites that riot, if you know what I mean. And it could be stress, psychological stress, physical stress. It could be infection. It could be the coronavirus, which is a really good example of a use case for stem cells. It's not exactly what people are talking about, and I'll get to that. But something, so you could have an infection, any manner of things can cause this inflammatory response. And then your immune system, either local or systemic, kind of goes into overdrive, becomes a backseat driver and tries to sort of fix the body by destroying the body. It's a little bit of a convoluted logic.
Right.
And that leads to lack of blood flow. And that lack of blood flow leads to cell death. And that cell death leads to scarring, or what they call fibrosis, which is advanced scar. And then that also leads to tissue or organ degeneration. So I call that the spiral of degeneration. Well, what's interesting about these cells, and it goes back to your first example of you cut yourself. So what do? They home to an inflammatory signal. And the first thing they do is they calm that inflammation down. And they get those immune cells to stop overreacting. So they modulate your immune response. Well, then what they do is they restore some blood flow. They actually grow new little blood vessels. So we've seen this with patients with vascular dementia. That's where there's not enough blood flow in the brain, so they can't remember things, or Alzheimer's. So you have Alzheimer's 10 years prior to being symptomatic with Alzheimer's. The patient typically starts with some sort of chronic systemic inflammation that affects the brain. It's well documented that they have an abnormal immune response in the brain. The blood flow dies off, and then the neurons die off. Well, so now you can get the cells into the brain, and you get some blood flow going, and the immune system working, and then they can regenerate tissue or neurons, and they'll actually clear out some of the dead stuff. Like an amyloid plaque is kind of the same thing as a scar that you would have in your knee if you tore your meniscus, right? So because you got a torn meniscus, now you've had inflammation, so now the blood vessels have died off, and then to replace that torn tissue, you get some scar. It's like putting some plywood in a broken window. It makes sense, better than having a storm, but it doesn't work very well for very long, right?
Right.
And so these cells, at least in the dish, have been shown to reverse amyloid plaques But we're not actually thinking that we have to reverse those amyloid plaques to get the patient's brain to work better. What we have to do is restore the blood flow, reduce the neuroinflammation, get the immune system working, and then you can see some pretty remarkable things, even with patients with degenerative brain conditions or spinal cord injury.
Interesting. So the inflammation, one thing I will mention down in Ecuador, the night, the evening, hours after my friend did the stem cell treatment, she looked different. She looked like blood flow was happening throughout her body. She just had, her color came back. Now, obviously the kidneys were not immediately repaired, but there was a noticeable change. And I think I've always thought that was some work of the stem cells of increasing the blood flow, reducing inflammation in her entire system. So that's one of the things stem cells does obviously.
Yeah. So when you think about, the topic of the day is COVID for very good reason. Some people don't believe it's a real thing, but I think the most important part about understanding COVID, whether is that for a certain percentage, and maybe it's a small percentage, mostly older, but now they're starting to see this in young people and even kids. When you get this inflammatory response in your lungs, they call it a cytokine storm.
Yeah, we've heard that.
A cytokine is just there's two different kinds of cytokines. It's basically just a protein molecule, and these stem cells release certain types of cytokines, and you have cytokines that are traveling throughout your body, talking to one another. It's part of your sort of cellular communication network, right? And so when you get a cytokine storm, it means you get this overwhelming amount of inflammation, and that leads, in the case of COVID, it actually leads to it becoming a blood vessel disease. It starts to attack the inner lining of your blood vessels, called the endothelium, and then that leads to lung diseases, kidney disease, heart disease, all sorts of bad stuff. So even when the patient's cleared of the virus, they have some really serious chronic diseases. And this is where the good cytokines that are released from your adult stem cells come in, because they're anti-inflammatory. They modulate the immune response. They restore blood flow. They actually will restore the endothelium that's been damaged, that inner lining of your blood vessels and arteries. And then they will improve your overall immune function, as well as help to restore organ function. So I'm not convinced that you want to go, you wouldn't take what we do and treat a COVID patient, give him a liposuction and treat him unless you, like, it was just really no option. Not convinced that's really the use case for it, but there's definitely a use case for these follow-on effects and diseases that COVID caused and remain even after the virus is cleared.
Is there some part of the regenerative, whether it's stem cells or some of the other elements that come out of maybe fat or other things, being used on COVID? Is there any of that research being done, since you read a lot of different things?
Yeah, there's a lot of research on just using these mesenchymal stem cells while the patient's in the hospital.
Okay.
So let me explain. I want to explain a little bit about this cell population from fat, because I think people understand it makes a big difference.
Okay.
So I think it was Albert Einstein. He said, this is an exact quote, but it's close. Make things as simple as possible, but no more.
Okay.
And so if you think about the way our bodies work, our bodies have mesenchymal stem cells, hematopoietic stem cells, immune cells, and there's like 8 or 10 types of immune cells in the body. typical blood cells, that kind of thing, right? So those cells all, they talk to one another. They got a lot of crosstalk and they work together. And when we're healthy and we're doing well, they're in great communication. And when we're not, they're not.
Right.
Right. So it'd be like going to a concert. You want to go to a concert and watch Adele sing solo? Or do you want to go to a concert where she has, a chorus and a backup band and trumpets and violins and even, dancers?
Right.
So what you want is a mixed population of cells that really play off of one another, that make every other cell look better. And that in your fat, you have these mesenchymal stem cells, but it's only like 3 or 4% of the population. Now in bone marrow, it's 0.01%. So there's not very many mesenchymal stem cells in bone marrow, and they're extremely rare in cord blood and umbilical cord blood and umbilical cord tissue and amniotic fluid and that kind of thing, which is a whole another almost scam that's out there, people thinking they're getting stem cells when they're not. But in your fat, you have the most amount of these mesenchymal stem cells and other regenerative cells. So the numbers I remember are there's something like 30% of the cells are immune cells, and they're the right immune cells. And by the way, in our fat, every single immune cell exists in our fat. So it's actually a bona fide immune organ. It's got a bad rap because obesity is related, it's so correlated with disease. But if you don't have fat, you're dead.
So it's a storage,
right?
It's a storage unit, not only for energy, but there's for immune function as well.
Yeah, it's a bona fide immune organ. So what we do is we have a internationally approved device that's been used in 9 FDA trials so that it fits the requirement for the technology. It fits the technology requirement for the Right to Try Act. I sort of veered off that. And we put a bunch of immune cells into the patient that can counteract the abnormal immune response, whether it's COVID or rheumatoid arthritis or even heart disease has abnormal immune response or immune dysfunction. It's basically what triggers a heart attack is inflammation and an abnormal immune response.
So let's just back up. So you're taking fat. So you take the person's fat, the patient's fat, put it through your system, a spinning or whatever the heck you do, the voodoo in the little machine. And then what comes down, the serum, the stem cells, I'm using all the wrong terms. You put that into the actual location you're going after, or as a general throughout the blood in the system?
Both.
Okay.
So what we do that we pretty much pioneered in the Bahamas that now you see other people doing it as well, but we do now with Ambrose in the United States is that we always do an IV of the cells because particularly for our patient, a patient with a life-threatening or debilitating condition, and life-threatening, hey, high blood pressure is life-threatening.
Sure.
In case anybody's confused, right? It doesn't have to be like you're walking around with a gun to your head either. You could just have chronically high blood pressure and some other associated conditions. So in any event, we'll do that IV, and then let's say somebody's got a bad knee or they've got rheumatoid arthritis, so multiple joint destruction. We'll do injections locally as well. Or in the case of somebody with kidney disease, if we have a cath lab, we can actually put cells in through the renal artery, the artery to the kidney, or we could actually use somebody's dialysis port.
Right. Okay, so now, just so I clarify, in the fat tissue, you're pulling out stem cells, and we're talking a lot about inflammation, but they have other properties as well, don't they? I know at one point we
That's what
talked
I
about.
was.
Okay, go ahead.
Yeah, that's what I was saying. They're anti-inflammatory, but they also are immunomodulatory. They bring your immune system back to balance, or what they call in medicine homeostasis. And then they will grow new little blood vessels. So they're
Hmm.
what's called angiogenic, but they're also neurogenic, meaning they'll grow new nerve cells. So one of the things that's really interesting is that you have a disease like multiple sclerosis or MS. So that's a disease that's considered an autoimmune disease that leads to lack of blood flow, that leads to destruction of the insulation of your nerves, the myelin sheathing, which, by the way, is fat.
Of course, makes sense.
So your nerves are insulated with fat. By the way, your brain is 60% fat. So if
Yeah.
somebody calls you a fathead, take a win.
All right, thank you. I'll
Means you
remember
got
that.
more you got more going for you than they realize.
Okay, so talk to us
So,
about,
but
yeah,
wait,
yeah.
yeah. So now these cells will go in, and this has been shown in labs, and I think animals minimally. They'll go in, they'll calm down the inflammation and the immune response of that MS patient, but they'll actually remyelinate the demyelinated nerves that's causing all hell to break loose. Like a demyelinated nerve is like an electrical wire with no insulation,
Yeah.
but it's just bad. And then they'll remyelinate that nerve, and the person, or at least stop the demyelination. And
Prevent it
so
from
that
continuing.
yeah.
So
But
okay, go ahead. Finish your thought.
so we treated a patient. You may even know her. I'm pretty sure she's a mutual friend, but I can't say her
Yeah.
name. But we treated her in the Bahamas, and she was she had very poor balance. She was losing her eyesight. A lot of MS patients get what's called optic neuritis.
Hmm.
And so it's like another inflammatory condition that affects their eyes. And had very difficult bladder control, couldn't study because of bad headaches, couldn't work. And we treated her, and she worked at it too. Like patients who work at it do better. Your friend was always health conscious,
Yep.
so they'll always do better. But in any event, she got some spiritual enhancement, that kind of thing. Very religious gal, and it took about a year, maybe a little longer, and she's now back to work. She works a full 40-hour week, and she could barely keep her balance or hold her bladder or
Wow.
see. Like her doctor told her she was going blind.
Wow.
Does every patient respond that well? No, because every patient's circumstances and, will to live and all that stuff is different, but she was a super responder.
Give us another one. Who else have you seen nice success with?
Well, we did. Well, the one that's probably the most complicated, but it shows. So hopefully, I won't bore anybody, but it shows the amazing potential of combining a patient's own biology, like you were describing, with someone who had the will to really get better and did the work to do so. So we treated a guy named Jeff. He's on our website, and he loved to race in the desert, race cars in the desert. So one day he's driving in the desert. And this is a pretty scary story. He's driving in the desert, 150 miles an hour, windshield blows out, and hits him in the head, goes and admits to the hospital because he's not feeling so well. And they do an MRI of his spine, and they tell him he has what doctors like to call, or orthopedics like to call, a pancake spine, meaning that the nerve is being compressed by the disc, and when you have a pancake spine, you're at risk of being paralyzed. You know, that nerve getting cut or whatever and being paralyzed.
Sure.
So they convince him to go in for a spinal fusion. They do, I think, 1 level or 2 levels up in at the top end of his spine, back, called the thoracic spine, sort of the middle, right before you get to the neck. And he comes out a paraplegic. That sucked.
Yeah.
I mean, like really a paraplegic, but then it gets a little worse, and this gets a little graphic, but then he can't move his bowels. So he ends up with an abscess colon. So they have to do a surgery to fix that. It's called an ostomy. And they fix that, but he ends up with horrible scar pain. And then he ends up with 24/7 pain on the other side, referred pain. And this is like 10 out of 10 pain.
Wow.
And but this guy's a fighter, and he gets to the point where he can walk with canes, but he's got this chronic scar pain. He also has horrible neuropathy, which is probably a combination of his diabetes type 2 and the spinal cord injury. Because remember, that neuropathy, that buzzing that he described, it comes from the fact that the myelin sheathing got inflamed and degenerated. So there's demyelination, not just with an MS patient, but with a spinal cord injury patient or a patient who has nerve pain or neuropathy. It's all a different horn from the same devil, demyelination, right? And so then, again, this is a bit of a story, but it's probably probably never been done in medicine. So it's worth telling. And it's what motivates me. These stories are what motivate me to try to help other people. So anyway, he also could have been from the diabetes, could have been from the spinal cord injury, probably a little bit of both, but he has some erectile dysfunction. So he's married to a younger, wonderful wife, totally cared for him. But, you know, he can't have the kind of sexual relations he would like to have for a 50-something-year-old guy. And so, and then he had a diabetic symptom called Charcot foot, where the toe, because there's lack of blood flow to the toes curl up.
Wow.
And that's really painful. There are a lot of 4-letter words you could throw into this, right?
For the listeners, there's got to be a good ending to this. We're going through hell right now on this story, but there's got to be a good ending. Go ahead, Matt. You're killing us here. This sounds horrible.
It's horrible. So what we did is we did an IV of these adipose-derived stem and regenerative cells, or what we call ADRCs. And we use a little sugar alcohol that opens up the blood-brain barrier and the blood-spinal cord barrier. Oh, by the way, he couldn't move his bowels very well either, and he couldn't control his bladder well for a 54-year-old man. So, particularly at night. So so we do this IV.
But now he's still a quadriplegic. He's a paraplegic?
No. Remember, he got himself out of the wheelchair. He was walking with sticks, but he was on 6 medications, including opioids daily, you know, anti-inflammatories, antispasmodics, an MS drug for balance. I didn't even know that. And I think there was diabetes drug.
All right. A horrible
He was
mess.
on a lot of drugs.
All right. Okay.
He's a horrible mess. But trust me, that isn't to demean him, because he was fighting his way through. But anyway, so we treated him, and there's a protocol we have for erectile dysfunction. There's a protocol we have for the neuropathy in his legs. There's a protocol that restores the muscle, your muscle control with your rectum for your ability to move your bowels. There's a protocol we have for Charcot foot where we inject in the toes. I'm not getting into all the details of it, but in any event, we did all that in a single day procedure.
Wow.
Today, well, within 24 hours, for some reason, that anti-inflammatory effect that you mentioned our mutual friend had, his toe straightened out the next day. He got an immediate response on that, never looked back. The neuropathy, and then we injected around the scars where it hurts so much, right? The scar pain started to diminish after about a month. The buzzing in his legs started to diminish after a couple of weeks. I think I got a text from his wife at 2 or 3 weeks. Those 6 injections you did in his penis? Not me, but the doctors. 100%. And he texted me back and said, I was sitting in my my chair in my living room. Guys like their chairs. So he was sitting in his chair and he just looked down and went, what the hell just happened? But he returned to excellent sexual function, right? So now I kind of lost track of him. He's a busy entrepreneur. He's got an amazing trucking business or logistics business, I should say. So he's always busy. And I get a hold of him at 6 months and, he's off of all of his meds. And by the way, his diabetes markers have normalized. He doesn't have any more signs of diabetes. He still has some buzzing and he still has some numbness in his legs, but he's got full bowel function. He doesn't have to stress to go to the bathroom. He's not waking up at night anymore. So he's now 18 months out, and talk about, does it have a good ending? The only thing that scares me is he's racing in the desert again at 150 miles an hour, like every weekend. Wow. He's got thousands of people following him on Instagram, and he's promoted the benefit he got from his cell therapy with us, but he's racing the desert. He learned to scuba dive, and he's on our website, and he learned to fly helicopters.
Wow.
What the hell? And he's not on any more drugs.
Wow.
So he's actually more active today than before he had the spinal cord injury. And what's really crazy is he got a second opinion on that MRI where they sent him in for the fusion. Talk about failed back, right? It's the ultimate in failed back surgery. But he got a second opinion on the MRI. He didn't have a pancake spine.
It's not what he had.
No.
So he had surgery on that and didn't need to, shouldn't have had surgery on that?
Yeah.
Oh, man.
But at least 20% of all diagnoses are wrong. And we all know people who have gone into one doctor after another and they never really
Second
get diagnosed.
opinion is always smart, I've learned.
Yeah. Or third.
Yeah, exactly. So this was from a one-day treatment with this gentleman.
One day. He's now 20 months out.
Wow.
Has not had any relapse. Yeah. Amazing.
Okay. What do you know his Instagram account if anybody wants to look at him? Do you know what it is?
It's Bad Boy Toy Factory. Let me look on my phone. Yeah, Toy Factory.
Ahead. Yeah, go ahead. Bad Boy Toy Factory. So you're listening to Matt Feshbach. We're almost towards the end. He is the CEO of the Ambrose Cell Therapy. You can find the website at ambrosecelltherapy.com. Again, Matt's not paying me. I'm not paying Matt. I just find this stuff fascinating, and I know he's deep into it, and that's why I wanted to talk to him. So what is it?
It's number one, Bad Toy Factory. One Bad Toy Factory.
Okay,
all one
so
word.
It starts with the number one. One Bad Toy. Say it again.
One Bad Toy Factory.
All right,
it's a wild Instagram account because he'll show himself racing or flying the helicopter or in the gym. He does these balance exercises in the gym. I mean, this is a guy who couldn't walk without sticks. He does balance exercise in the gym that you're younger than me, so maybe you're in a lot better shape, but I'm in good shape for a 67-year-old guy. And I can tell you, I couldn't even come close to that. Some of the things he does now.
So he doesn't walk with sticks. I mean, he's able to move.
Oh yeah. Oh no, he's fine.
Wow.
I mean, like he would tell you that he still has some buzzing in his legs.
Yeah.
But he actually has to be reminded of how bad it was because
Wow.
he can't remember it anymore.
Fascinating. So Matt, we're getting close to time, but I want to a couple of things for listeners. Number one, what would you give as a feel of someone comes in to get some treatment of some kind with stem cells? What kind of, obviously you're not going to have results like this gentleman all the time, but do 50% of the people that try it get some result? I mean, what do you have a feel for what people might be able to think with?
Yeah, with the cases that we've treated in the clinics I've been involved in, out of 325, I would argue that somewhere around 85% have reported benefits, patient-reported benefits, and out of that 85%, it's important that a few had ALS, Lou Gehrig's disease, and I would argue it might slow it down for a little bit, but it doesn't really work. So if you took that out, percentage would go up. And I think of how many are really remarkable. I mean, not many are as complicated as Jeff, but somewhere in the 70% range, you get remarkable outcomes. But look, most of these patients, any benefit is a miracle because they have a chronic disease, and these drugs that they're taking, whether it's Enbrel or Humira or all these or cardiovascular drugs, all they do is either stabilize or slow down a bad condition. They don't cure anything. And we don't cure anything, but we do improve symptoms, function, and quality of life. And there are many, many patients who fail these surgeries, drugs, and devices, meaning their quality of life didn't get better, or maybe it even got worse, or maybe they're not amenable to those things in the first place. But I want to make one thing really clear. I know I'm probably over my time limit, but not all stem cell clinics are created equal. There are many that claim, you can go to a chiropractor. They claim to give you stem cells from cord blood. There are no stem cells in that product. There's a new fad called exosomes. Those have never been used in a human trial. There's what we try to do on our website isn't sell you anything. We don't have some tricky website that captures your name and requires you to subscribe and crap like that. Our goal on our website is just to educate you so you can see what it takes for you to get better. And, we aspire to be the best that we can be for you.
Fair enough. And I'm glad you brought that up of what people should look for. Just if you could list off, you said that Lou Gehrig's disease probably doesn't really help that. What are the sweet spots? What are the situations you've seen that using stem cells, it's pretty likely that there's going to definitely be some benefit? What are those?
Dementia, even sometimes very advanced dementia, 80% of those patients do somewhere between well and extremely well. Wow. Parkinson's is surprisingly good. MS can be very good. We did 30 MS patients, and I believe 80% of them reported at least stabilizing or getting better, and they all had what's called progressive MS, meaning it's getting worse every day. So that's a good one. Any autoimmune disease is great because these cells are so anti-inflammatory and so immunomodulatory. They really help restore normal immune function. So autoimmune diseases are great. And what we specialize in, honestly, is these very complicated patients with 2 or more chronic conditions, because that's debilitating. They're managing all day, every day around these conditions. The average senior sees 7 doctors a year and takes 7 meds, 4 prescribed and 3 over the counter.
Wow.
Yeah. It's, somewhere, I've read 2 different numbers, but minimally 68% of seniors have 2 or more chronic conditions.
Wow. Yeah.
So
It is the way, the medical way is to continue giving drugs. Okay, Matt. So thank you for your time. I just want to say this is Matt Feshbach again, CEO of Ambrose Cell Therapy. You're located out of Tampa. People can find the website at ambrosecelltherapy.com. You're working on Beverly Hills. I know we've talked about
yeah.
that. It's safe.
And yeah.
I mean, you've not had anybody croak or have a unicorn horn come out of their head. I mean, because we're talking about your own cells. This is something I tell people. It's the cells from your body going back in your body.
We've never had a cell-related adverse event.
Right.
So you can have issues with anesthesia, or you can have issues, and so we only use, this is another thing, we only use board-certified doctors, board-certified anesthesiologists, board-certified plastic surgeon, board-certified pain doctor or orthopedic to do injections. So we're always managing to, a goal of 0 adverse events.
Very cool. Last words for anybody listening and thinking about this and know someone that might be able to be helped by this.
In addition to contacting you, I'm happy to give out my email address. Is that okay with you?
Yeah.
It's Matt with 2 T's, because 1 T you'd step on it or you're from Europe. So it's Matt at ambrosecelltherapy.com. Feel free to email me, and I always respond. I like helping people, and I'd like to help more people.
That's awesome. I appreciate you. We spent quite a bit of time. Thanks for spending your time. I know you've spent years researching this, and we appreciate having somebody who understands this to be able to explain it to people. And you're out there helping folk, so that's important too. So thank you for being on the show.
Thanks, John. Thank you for having me.
Well, that was Matt Feshbach. I wanted to bring that show to you for some time. I've looked a lot at stem cells. I think it's important to understand what they are and not be afraid of them. These are cells that are coming, especially when you take them out of your fat. There's a lot of different ways you can get it. I know people have gotten either other stem cells from other animals, from other people, and those may have efficacy. I don't know. I'm no expert. But I do know safety-wise, taking your own stem cells out of your body and putting it back in is safe. Now, of course, nothing in this show is medical fact. Anything you want to find out medically, talk to a doctor. You can email Matt, as he had said. So nothing on this show. We're not prescribing anything or telling you any kind of cures here, but we wanted to give you some more information. I still find it fascinating that the FDA, you can take blood out of your body and put it back in, no problem. You can take blood out of your body and even trim it down a bit. It takes some of the stuff out of it and put it in your body, no problem. But you take blood out of your body and spin it down too far, separate all the elements out of your blood, or let's say fat. Now let's go back to fat, because that's what this is. So if you take fat out of your body, you can stick fat back in. If you take fat out of your body and take a few elements out and stick it back in, it's all legal. But you take fat out of your body, this is where the stem cells are residing. You take the fat out of your body, your own, this is your fat. And spin it down and separate it all out. And you take the stem cells, you cannot put it back in your body by law, by the FDA. I don't get. I get that we're trying to protect people, but it's my tissue. If I want to get one of these machines that Matt has in his clinic and have it in my bedroom and spin around my fat and stick it back in, and that's not legal, come on. I don't get that part, because I think there's some protection of the medical industry happening here. The monopoly of medicine and having this new natural way coming in that maybe would eliminate your need for drugs. You heard about his example of that guy that has the Instagram account. Okay, so there's that. Appreciate you listening to that. This is a long show today. Also, anybody listening on the video and watching still, you can see my hair. This is my experiment in having long hair. Feel free to email me what you think, like or hate. I am getting a haircut in a week, so we're going to see. I'm going to probably cut some of it off. I know my dad, if he was around, he'd go, "What the? Get a haircut." He passed away about a decade ago, but I'll never forget that. So that he's, you need a haircut. I've always liked longer hair. I don't know what it is. And I just have one last thought before we go on the rise in cases here in the U.S. of COVID. The trick will be whether or not we have deaths rise as well. They're spiking as far as cases. We have more cases going on now than we've ever had in the country. And if the deaths don't spike as well, if they don't ramp up, then frankly, for me, who cares if you get it? We're talking about trying to prevent death. So if we get it, but it doesn't cause severe adverse reactions like death, then it's not such an issue. So I'm monitoring that myself, wanting to see if the death rate goes up. Now, there's an amazing website I've told you about before, healthweather.com, I think it is. Healthweather.com. Unbelievable. These guys have thermometers that you put in your mouth to see if you're ill, like the normal thermometer, but it's digital. And you sign up, and the information anonymously goes off to the company, and they track. They have over 1 million thermometers in the U.S., and they're able to track what's going on with influenza. That's what they've been tracking for years. And now COVID. They have about a 14-day advance warning of when there's going to be an outbreak in the U.S. for COVID. It's unbelievable what they've been able to determine. I dig into that site and I just get fascinated by it. So let's see if we have, by the way, there's another statistic out, 42%, you've probably heard this before. New York Times is showing 42% of the deaths from COVID have come in the US have come from nursing homes and other long-term care facilities. So 42% of the deaths have come from that. Of all deaths, 42% have come from that. So we need to certainly protect those people in those situations. I'm trying to figure out what we need to figure out is who to protect and who to let roll, because we got to get the economy going. We can't just let this thing go forever. And I'm glad we are getting the economy going, as long as the spike in COVID is not going to cause deaths. So that's what we'll watch. That's it. Thanks for listening. This is a little bit longer show today. I hope you liked it. You can always email me at heysean@seanburke.net. This show will be on YouTube and Facebook as a video. If you want to get the link to the video and you want links to all the different places that this plays as a podcast, go to seanburke.net and you can sign up with your email, and I drop it into your email box. We do. And it goes in. Tracy Andruskavich is the producer of the show. And so thank you to Tracy for getting Matt on the show. She does a great job and helping make sure we have great guests. So go to seanburke.net and sign up there and put the email address, and I will send after this show comes out with any extra links so you have it. Okay, that's it for today. Thanks very much for listening. We're always talking about health, and especially with COVID. Very, very important to be healthy, because it seems to do more damage to those who have one or more health conditions going on. And we certainly have that in the U.S. I have 4 shows at seanburke.net with doctors, actually more than 4 shows. You can hit one of the little search buttons there, find the shows with the doctors, all natural. And that's what's helped me. I've come back to health. I'll tell you what, yesterday I probably felt as good as I've felt in possibly decades, guys. So if you listen to those shows, I am following a lot of and I talk about it on those shows. So my health is just increasing and getting better all the time. It's fantastic. And those shows explain why. Okay. Hope you have a good 4th. Here's my shirt. We'll talk to you the next time. Bye-bye.